What's going on, everyone? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Eat, Train, Prosper. Today we are recording episode 132, episode title, Bryan's post-race recap. So Bryan just finished up his race that we have been talking about on the podcast for literally like 4 or 5 months leading up to this. We're going to dive in, get some of his insights from what I'm going to call a stellar performance from Bryan. So very nicely done there, my friend. And we're also going to cover a little bit of how we approach rest days. We got an interesting DM about them and thought it would be a really cool kind of aside to slide into today's episode. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the episode, Bryan, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah, it's kind of weird that the updates today are not about my biking because the actual bulk of the episode is about my biking, whereas it's just been relegated to the updates for the last number of months. So this is flipping it on its head a little bit. So I'll save all the biking updates for the bulk of the episode, but quickly jumping into a few updates here. After the last couple weeks where I had weird bouts of ambiguous overreaching / sickness, I talked last week on the episode about how I was just feeling so good. Finally, it's like everything peaked at the right moment. And I think a lot of that had to do with being more cognizant of making sure that I was consuming sufficient food, because during that overreaching sickness time, whatever that was, my body weight plummeted down all the way to 180. And it just wasn't giving me the nutrients that I need, I think, to be recovered. And so I think that was part of that milieu of why I wasn't feeling great during that period of time. I just wasn't eating enough, and I was obviously exercising too much. And so last week, I finally started getting my body weight to creep back up again. And I've been making a continued effort to eat food. Got a body weight high for the last few months, or I guess the last month or two. The other day, I hit 186 a couple days ago and down to 185 this morning, but basically hanging back around the mid 180s, which seems to be a much better place for me than the low 180s, at least to not get there so drastically. The new cycle of Bryan's program started yesterday in the app, as well as for me personally. And it was a push session. So we're doing this PPL split, kind of like we talked about it on the last episode. It was the pros and cons of PPL split. And did my first session yesterday, which was awesome. It was push. And one thing I really liked about this was that, I had this big bike race on Saturday, so it was primarily legs. And now, because of this PPL split setup, I don't actually train legs until Thursday, which is kind of cool. So I basically am going to have a little over a week from the last time I trained legs, meaning they're obviously going to get pretty sore, but also cool that they come last in sequence. So I'm able to hit some upper body stuff, which wasn't really super affected during the bike race, and then hit the legs once I'm like fully recovered. As I was doing my first PPL session yesterday, doing push, I realized one con that we missed in the pros and cons episode last week. And the con, it's just a small one, but I've really embraced the idea of alternating antagonist movements over the last number of months. So that would be like, alternating a bicep with a tricep or a chest with a back or whatever. Just kind of movements that don't conflict with the other movement. But when you're training the entire same structure of the body at the same time, like push, you literally can't do that. So I'm used to these sessions now that I've gotten down to 60 minutes or so over the last few months as I kind of deprioritized lifting, but also because I was able to alternate between these antagonist muscle groups. My session yesterday, man, I'm right back to taking 80 minutes plus. It was 85 minutes for my session yesterday to do push. And so I guess it just is what it is. Like, without the ability to alternate and with the need to take sufficient rest for performance, which I think is pretty vital, I just find these push-pull sessions going to probably take a little bit longer. Leg sessions actually might be a little bit faster because I can alternate between quad and ham, which I think is interesting, which leads me to a small pro that we maybe missed last week as well, which was that it's just so easy to train just upper body in a session, and not to do the full upper body, but just to do half of the upper body. And so this was kind of insinuated when we talked about it last week, because I talked about how leg days are just so daunting on the push-pull leg split, and they take so much out of you, and it almost acts as this like leg specialization cycle, because the legs are the muscle group that recovers on time to train again, whereas many of the upper body structures are going to recover well before they're trained again. And so it's really nice. I think I'm calling it a pro, but it's really nice to have these easy sessions where it just feels like I can go into the gym and not go through the motions, but I don't have to have like pre-session angst about how hard it's going to be or anything like that. Yesterday was push, and then today I'm doing pull, and pull has always been my favorite muscle group to train anyways. And so even though it's physically harder than push, I just enjoy it more. So that's also fun, which means that basically 2 out of 3 of my sessions in this cycle each time are going to be easy or super enjoyable. And then I really only have to like get up for it mentally for leg day. So another kind of hidden pro in there. Along the same line, we have a cool visitor coming in this weekend to train. This guy, Jerry Albrighton. I think I said that right. Or it could be Albritton, one of the two. But he's been following Bryan's program for a number of years now, which is really, really cool. He's the same like height, weight, build as me. We've had a lot of kind of back and forth. He looks way more jacked than me at this point, since I've been such a cardio king. But he's nutrition coached by Laura, who's our kind of COO at Paragon. And so he's coming into town this weekend, and me and him and Laura are going to head to the gym in Longmont and hit whatever session is up. I think based on the agenda, it's going to be a push session. And this dude is like savage strong at push. I saw a video of him the other day, dumbbell pressing the 120s for whatever my rep range was. It was like 6 to 10 or something. And then he was doing my dumbbell fly press. My PR on that is like 85 for 9 or 10. And he was doing sets with the hundreds. So I'm excited to finally meet him and have a session with him. And then, man, I have like 2 more quick updates, but let's jump over to you. And that way I can stop talking for a second.
Okay. Yeah. We'll go through mine pretty quick. New body weight low today of 201.9.
Nice.
So that is exciting. Also, so an upside of dieting, a downside of dieting, my pressing performance has completely stalled and even regressed in certain sessions, which is a pretty good indicator for me that like I've been in it for a while and a large amount of body fat has been lost. I've noticed that for some reason, like the pressing just goes, like leg performance is still getting better. I can kind of iron will that a little bit, but like my pressing just goes. And sometimes I'm even looking back at my logs and I'm like, I did that for what, And if I have like a day where like I had a good pressing session today, but the last time we did this one, so like 11 days ago or whatever, I was feeling like not great. My stomach was like a little bit iffy. I might've been like a little bit dehydrated. And I mean, performance tanked insanely. Like it was comical how much performance dropped off. So definitely an increase from that terrible performance, but it is happening. So fortunately, that's also an indicator that I am getting decently lean, and that the end of the diet may be somewhat near. Let's call it maybe 6-8 weeks away, sort of thing.
So initially, when you started this diet, your thought was you would get back to the low 190s where you had finished your prior diet as like some sort of kind of similar comparison, but 6 to 8 weeks likely will not get you quite there at this point. Yeah.
No, not at current rates or anything. We've actually been increasing food as my body weight has just been kind of cratering a little bit, like 2 weeks ago, my average was in the 206s. I just had a 201. My average this past week was like a 202.4 or something like that. So I actually have 2 refeeds per week now. I have like a midweek, whether that's like a Wednesday or a Thursday, depending on if it's a training day, adding 250 grams of carbs and then like my free sushi meal. But I mean, it's been a very interesting, different approach to dieting. Is we are really leveraging training, and I average about 3 cardio sessions per week. There might be like 4, depending on if we need an extra recovery day or something like that. But I mean, with my free meals, my averages calories on the week are still well above 2,900, week over week, and weight
legit.
still just continues to go. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like body weight times 14 or 15, 14.
Yeah. And my step count is abysmal. I mean, I'm averaging 4,000, 5,000 steps per day. So,
yeah. Well, I think the pressing strength piece is something that we've discussed on here, and something that seemed to be ubiquitous across every client that I've ever dealt with that goes on a diet. I mean, especially males. I can't say that I've seen quite the same response from females on pressing strength. Maybe I just don't have a large enough sample size. But for me, for sure, I've talked about how pressing is the first thing to go. I have a client, Jeff Hain, who is just finished up his diet right now for his wedding, and he mentioned the pressing strength thing as well. So it is kind of odd how that seems to go, and yet we're able to maintain on pulling movements and even leg movements for the most part.
Yeah, I've seen it as well, and I would love to get some kind of inclination as to potentially why. There's I don't have a clue. Yeah, but it is very, very interesting, and this is like my third big diet, and this is the third time like realizing like, yeah, they've kind of progression has fallen off there again.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, so 2 things. If anyone has any insights into this, drop the comments below. If you've experienced it, we'd love to hear your story. And if you're a female that diets, let us know how you respond during the diet and what movements or areas of the body seem to fail you first.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Final update is we just wrapped up our final upgrade launch for the year, and then also the 3rd class we wrapped up all in the same weekend. Poor planning on our part to have them at the same time. Sometimes that just kind of happens, but the feedback from the 3rd class was just absolutely amazing. Like, people are so stoked about it, and it just makes me, if I'm being honest, just feel really good to put a product out there that people absolutely love and are like jumping to write a review on, sort of thing. So it's a very, very good, like, full circle. It's been a very positive year of coaches coming through Upgrade, and we're glad the work is kind of done for the year, and that we won't be launching it again for like 5 months. Yep. So excited about that. It's been very, very wholesome.
You guys have really crushed it, man. Very, very cool to see all the positive feedback.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And that's it from me.
All right. Well, jumping into my last 2 updates here. Actually, I'm going to save this for potentially a topic next week or in future weeks. So we will cancel part out real quick. Okay. So the last thing I was going to update on is that I've talked about on prior episodes how Dr. Mike T. Nelson and I have been in communication regarding him becoming my coach for cardio after this race ended. And so I wrote him a really extensive email yesterday, basically documenting how the race went, which we're going to talk about on here. Things I've learned about myself, my vitals, all the information that I think he would want to know to program cardio for me for this upcoming year. I can get into a little bit of kind of what I wrote him when we get done with the race recap. But one of the kind of hesitations or whatever in getting started is that I'm taking a trip to Bermuda with my bros here in Colorado. We're going October 18th to October 24th. And so that is going to be a bit of a hiccup in my training, my lifting, because I'll be in basically week 3 or week 2 of my cycle. And I don't think I'm going to be able to lift very many weights when I'm there. So that is one piece I'm working through. My plan is probably to bring some rings or like angles grips and basically just do push-ups and pull-ups for my push and my pull days. And then for leg days, I'll just kind of have to figure out what I'm going to do. I remember back in the CrossFit days, I would always do pistols, just endless pistols. Like some days it'd be like, oh, it's leg day. I'll do 200 pistols with like a rock as a goblet or something like that. So I will have to kind of think about that and what I want to do during that week. But ultimately what that means is that I don't want to start my cardio coaching plan until I get back from Bermuda to make sure that I can stay committed to it and all that stuff. So these next couple weeks until the Bermuda trip is done will likely just be kind of, hey, training, doing some cardio on my own, no coaching, and then jumping into coaching plan hopefully here. I suggested October 30th, which is a Monday as a start date. So we'll see how that goes. And that pretty much wraps up my updates.
Let's dive into this race recap, shall we?
Sure, yeah. All right, so where do I start here? The week of the race, the plan was for me to, the initial plan was for me to do a zone 2 easy session on Monday, a zone 2 session with a little bit of intensity on Wednesday, and then like a shakeout ride on Friday before the race on Saturday. What ended up happening was a little bit more than that. So I did those things that I just said. And then I also added in a short but intense workout on Tuesday. So 1 intense workout and 3 kind of more zone 2, like call them shakeout rides or whatever you want to do. Just kind of keep the legs loose. The one on Tuesday was really cool though, because it's coming off this period where I was sick/overtrained or whatever it was. And I really wanted to do this one on Tuesday because it was a hill that I had climbed in late July. Yeah, late July. And so I did it again in early October. It was about 9 weeks later. And at the time in July, I was obviously going as hard as I possibly could. It took me 10 minutes and 17 seconds to climb this like 600 foot elevation. It was maybe a mile and a half or something like that. But this time on Tuesday, I did it and I beat that time by 47 seconds, which is like an 8% improvement in, 9 weeks, which is pretty insane. And it gave me a lot of confidence because it showed me that I wasn't in this like overtrained sick state anymore. And that I was, that the feeling that I was feeling like, hey, I feel recovered now. This is, everything is going as it should for this race. It kind of proved to me that it was in fact all good. So that was really, really positive reinforcement going into the race. And I'm really glad that I did that hill. I can't imagine what it would have been if I would have done worse and how that would have affected me mentally. But going in to the race, having that kind of positive feedback from Tuesday was really, really cool. So we headed up Friday afternoon. It's about a 4-hour drive from Boulder to Fruita, where we were staying for the race. I drove up with my buddy Andy, who is a semi-professional gravel racer. And by semi-professional, I guess he is professional, but there's like levels to it, like there is anything. And he, to my knowledge, doesn't get paid by his sponsors, but they do give him, like he has a $15,000 bike that he got for free, and he gets all the gear and all the nutrition and all that stuff. So semi-professional bike racer, been doing it for a while, done some of the really hard races. Like last year he did a 140-mile race in San Diego called BWR, Belgian Waffle Ride, and it had 11,000 feet of climbing, which is just insane for me to even think about, because the most climbing I've ever done in a single session has been about 2,000 feet. So this dude did 140 miles with 11,000 feet. And so we basically dorked out the entire ride up and talked about the gravel racing scene around the world, which I've gotten a little bit obsessed with. And just kind of like strategy for the race and like things to focus on, et cetera, et cetera. He'd been in my ear for a while now about drafting. And drafting is essentially the idea of getting in a line with other bikers when you're racing and getting close enough to their tire that they're essentially blocking the wind for you. And I was very anti-drafting for forever. I was like, I don't feel comfortable with it. It's too risky. I don't want to, risk screwing my race up by being so close to someone's tire. And then, accidentally we hit tires, we cross wheels, whatever it is. And then suddenly we go down and the race is over. So I've been very hesitant to do the drafting thing, but he kept being in my ear about it and being like, dude, you're going to have to learn to draft. And so Friday, when we went out for our shakeout ride before the race on Saturday, we were riding around some of the roads that we knew we'd be racing for the actual race itself and just kind of familiarizing ourselves with it. And he was like, dude, just try to draft. And so he got in front of me, we drafted a bit, and I was amazed and honestly surprised at how much of a difference it makes, to the point that literally I would be in the front of Andy and he'd be drafting off me. And I would be working my ass off like in zone 4 or something like that, like working really hard. And then as soon as we would switch and he would start in front and I would get behind him, immediately I had to work less hard. I even had moments where I had to stop pedaling because if I would have pedaled, I would have ran into his back wheel. And so immediately my heart rate drops from wherever it was, 20 beats. And I'm sitting there like, this is so easy. I need to go faster than this. And so that was really positive for me to experience that, because it kind of takes us into race day, where it turned out that I did end up having to draft a whole ton. Do you have anything to jump in? Any comments before I kind of continue into race day?
What I think is just really funny is your friend who's like, dude, who's literally a professional. This is what you need to do. And you're like, I don't know if that's for me. I think I'm going to do my own thing. Yeah. Because drafting is like massive in the racing world, especially in like NASCAR, in those sorts of things. It's a massive strategy point. But I just thought it was, I just find it funny, like how confident you are in yourself. Not necessarily funny, but like, it's interesting to me because you're like, I don't know if you're right about this. I think I'm going to do my own thing.
It's not that I think that it's not that I didn't think he was right. And it's not that I had tons of confidence in myself. I think that was born from a place of fear. Like I legitimately was scared of ruining my race by doing something stupid because I was trying to draft when I wasn't familiar with drafting.
Understood.
And so with all the training I'd done, I had never drafted in any of my training. And so I knew what pace I could handle, what heart rate I was comfortable with, what I thought I could sustain. And I just was very confident and aware of my own abilities, to the point that I didn't really want them to be affected by other people's situation. So I really think it was more from fear. But yeah, I mean, it is pretty funny because as we get into the race, you'll see that I did draft. Okay. So race day happens. The race was at 2:30, and that was not a huge, I wasn't a huge fan of that. Neither was Andy or the other two guys that I went up there with. And the reason it was late is because this race that we did had a 200-mile course, a 100-mile course, and a 50-mile course. And the 200 is insane. It's like you literally start in Moab, Utah, and then you end up in Colorado. It's just like you're going through all of the different terrains. Like you can actually see the colors of the rocks change because you're going 200 miles, which is so wild to me. So there was one guy who's like a high level professional racer, Pete Stetna, and he ended up winning the 200 by like an hour and a half over the next closest person. But the 200s left at, 6 or 7 a.m. The 100s left at 10 a.m. or whatever. And then we were 2:30 because the idea was that they would try and coordinate it so that all the finish times were somewhat similar so they could do the award ceremony and all that stuff. So we had to wait, just kind of sit around until 2:30. I had a big plan of how I was going to fuel my performance with, carbs and protein at 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. and then, let it settle before the race at 2:30. And of course, whether it was nerves or whatever, I couldn't eat at all. So 11 o'clock rolled around and I had my first feeding and I was only able to stomach like 6 ounces of ground beef and a little bit of rice, which is very paltry compared to what I wanted to put into my body. But I was mostly confident because a lot of the rides that I've done leading up to it, I wasn't extremely fed. It would be like, similar to what I did there. So ultimately, I think that was probably a positive. I fueled myself by taking a 3-liter Hydra Pack. And when I would train, I would use the 2-liter Hydro Pack, but I would always run out of liquid by about the 2-hour mark. And so I figured with the 3-liter pack, that should get me that extra hour in there. I mixed my sludge. So anyone that knows me, a lot of people make fun of me for this sludge that I make, but it's basically 2 scoops of whey protein, an aggressive amount of Gatorade powder, basically because I'm going to need those carbs for the race. I put in about 110 grams of carbs from Gatorade powder, which is actually quite a bit below what most endurance recommendations are. We've talked about this, I think, on the podcast before, but endurance recommendations are usually in the 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. And that just never sat right with me. My body just couldn't seem to process that much simple carbohydrate. So I always found about 30 to 40 grams of carbs per hour was perfect. And so that's what I went with for this race as well. And then just in case, I had a bar, like a protein carb bar in my kit. And I had a pack of these kind of electrolyte sugar gummies that you just store in your cheek and then they kind of dissolve. And so you get like really fast energy that way. And it turned out that was sufficient nutrition. I finished the race and ran out of my 3-liter pack, like literally right as I was crossing the finish line. I did about half the gummies and didn't touch the bar. So my nutrition strategy seemed to be great. Race started at 2:30. There was about 50 people in the race. I'd say maybe 30 guys and 20 girls, or 32 and 18, something along those lines. Everyone was decked out in race gear. Like everyone, it seemed to me at least, had raced before, wearing proper biker gear. Every single person had clip shoes. So I was riding in flats, which basically means I was wearing tennis shoes with regular ass pedals. And these people had proper bike cleats that kind of like clip into the pedal. So I obviously didn't look very official. I was just kind of like this jack dude in a tight shirt that was out there racing against people. And once we started, the race started with they called it the hardest climb of the day. But to me and everyone that I talked to, it was very much not the hardest climb of the day. So it was about, I want to say 550 feet of elevation over 2 miles or something like that. It's actually kind of similar to that climb that I did on Tuesday leading up to the race. So once the race started, 3, 2, 1, go, a group of 4 people took off like super fast. It was my buddy Andy, the semi-pro racer, this guy Josh, who I'll bring up again later, another guy who his name was Frederick, but I won't really talk much about him, and this lady named Jamie, who was actually she is a professional racer and has won mad long endurance event. Like she won, I think, Unbound 350, which is a 350-mile race through Kansas. And so Andy was telling me, he was like, look, I'm just going to jump on Jamie's wheel and try to hang out with her as long as I can. And so those 4 people basically took off, and then I took off after them, and I was ahead of a number of people in the pack, but still quite a ways behind that front group of 4. And so we got through that first climb. I could still see them, but they were starting to gain distance on me. And I was basically in 4th place at that point for males. If you count Jamie, I guess I was in 5th place. But that continued at that rate for about 12 miles. And then we had a road section. And during the road section, a number of the people that were behind me, a number of the guys passed me. And not a number, like maybe like 2 or 3 of them passed me. And I realized at that point, 12 miles in, that, we were about a quarter way done, and I felt great. Like I felt like I had more in me. So I began to kind of pick my pace up a little bit at that point. Getting past will also kind of get you motivated to get moving as well. And so over the course of the next 8 to 10 miles or so, I passed all the people that passed me. Actually, backtrack for a second. So as I would approach these people that had passed me earlier, they were all working in groups. So they were all drafting off of each other, and I still hadn't drafted yet in this race. So I would come up on a group, and I'd be like, oh, they're moving too slow. Okay, I'm going to pass them. Well, as soon as I go to pass them, they jump on my wheel and start drafting off of me. And I was like, well, this sucks. Now I'm the one putting in all the energy and they're just like using me essentially. And so I realized at that point that I had to play the game. I had to be part of the draft line. Otherwise, I was just going to be tired as fuck the whole time. And all these people were going to be fresh, just riding my wheel. So as I would come up on a group, and these groups were not just people from my 50-mile race. I was coming up on people from the 100-mile race as well. So it was kind of ambiguous where I was in placement. Like I didn't know the faces of everybody or anything like that. And so I would come up on a group of 3 or 4 guys. We would draft in a line for a little bit. And then eventually it would reach a point where I'd be like, okay, they're too slow. I'm out. And I would drop them. And then I had to come up on another group and it'd be the same thing. I would draft off them for, a couple miles. And then I'd realize they were too slow and I'd drop them. So that continued until about the 20-mile point, at which point we came across something called Dino breeding grounds. That's what the organizers called it. And this was by far the most absurd, worst part of the entire race. It was basically, how do I describe it? It was like elevated cobblestone almost. Like instead of cobblestone that's kind of flat where you don't really feel it a ton, these were like cobblestones that had 2 or 3 inches of elevation on each one. So you're like kind of bouncing between these rocks. And it slowed you down significantly. Like you couldn't go very fast over it. Your entire body is vibrating. Like every time it's like, doo, 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 doo. And my hands are getting rubbed raw on the handlebars because of all the jolting and stuff. They said that these dino breeding grounds were only going to be 2.5 miles. So I'm like very keenly looking at my GPS as I'm going and being like, okay, a mile. Okay, 2 miles. All right, only half a mile to go. This is awful. I don't know why, but this shit went on for like 8 miles. It did get a little better after 2.5, but maybe like 20% better. It still was really, really awful terrain and you couldn't go very fast at all. So that was a bit of a kick in the nuts. Just kind of getting your body vibrated and jolted like that for 2.5 miles or whatever it was. And nobody passed me during that time, which was nice. I think everyone was pretty much struggling with that. So we got to aid station number 2, which was at the 28-mile mark. So I was over halfway at that point. And a number of guys behind me, I noticed, were pulling in and stopping at the aid station, but I did not. That was my plan the whole time, was to make sure I had enough liquid that I wasn't going to stop at the aid. So I just continued on. And there was the worst climb of the day right after the aid station. So like they were saying that first climb in the very beginning was the worst climb of the day. This second one was so much worse. It was 3.3 miles long and 633 feet of elevation or something like that. So the grade itself wasn't quite as steep as the first one, because the first one was 500 plus feet over 2 miles. And this was 600 feet over 3 miles. So it didn't feel like the grade necessarily overall was super steep, but it was just so long. And there were parts of it that were very steep. I think at one point it got up to like a 10-degree climb for what took me maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So it wasn't like a significant amount of time, but enough that you're like in it climbing this really steep shit for a while. And a number of people got off their bikes and walked it up it. Well, I noticed as I was getting into this climb about halfway through that the guy Josh, who was on Andy and Jamie's wheel for a while in the beginning, so he was for sure ahead of me in the 50, he was really struggling up the hill. And so I passed him and dropped him like real fast and got to the top of the hill finally and began descending. Josh has a downhill mountain biking background. That was his kind of pursuit before he got into gravel racing. And so he basically caught me and dropped me on the descent, which was a bit demoralizing because I had worked so hard to get past him. And I was like, I'm in third now, I passed this dude, like, I got this, podium time, baby. And he dropped me so hard on the descent. It was a pretty technical descent too. It was like dirt and rock with a bunch of grass just kind of popping up out of nowhere everywhere. And I just wasn't very comfortable with sand. So there were all these places where the rock and the sand would kind of converge. And if you've ever ridden a bike in sand, you know that you can't actually really ride a bike in sand. So I'd hit these sand pits and just kind of like swerve and get all fucked up. And Josh was way ahead of me at this point. So finally I reached the bottom of that descent, maybe at the 35 mile mark. And at that time, another guy had caught me. So I guess I'm clearly really bad at descending technical terrain. So this guy, Vincente, who's also part of the 50, and Josh was ahead of me. Vincente caught me. So he and I were kind of working together. And then finally at the 38 or 39 mile mark, we finally ditched the dirt and the gravel and we got on pavement for what should be the final 10 miles of the race. And once we hit the pavement, Vincente and I started kind of working together where I would draft for a bit and then he would draft for a bit. And we were able to gain a lot of ground and actually began catching Josh. And so I turned to Vincente and I'm like, dude, let's go get this fool, and turned it on a little bit. And we did eventually catch Josh with maybe 7 or 8 miles to go. And so then the three of us kind of worked together back and forth, drafting off of each other. With 3 miles to go, we're all still working together. So we stayed together for a number of miles there. And with 3 miles to go, we see this massive hill in front of us, not like long, but steep and short. And Josh was like, all right, this is the final kicker. And then it's, home free from there. And we all kind of look around and I'm like, man, my legs are fried. And Vincente's like, I'm fucked right now. And me and Josh and Vincente hit this hill and then went up it. And Vincente just died. He got dropped so hard on that hill. He just had nothing left. Josh and I crested the hill at the same moment. So there was about 3 miles to go. And then Josh and I are working together, drafting off of each other back and forth. And we're basically fighting for third because Vincente had fallen off. And I made a gesture with my left arm, basically pointing left, telling Josh that, hey, we need to turn left. Josh thought that I was saying, hey, I need you to pull, to basically be the one to pull the draft line now, because I was in front at the time. So I waved left. Josh thought I was telling him to take the front of the draft. So I turned left and Josh basically skidded to a stop and was like, oh, fuck. So there's like 2 miles to go and I'm in the lead. And I'm like, I got this now, So I was pushing it, but I was also kind of dying at the same time. Josh put in a savage superhero effort and caught me with just less than a mile to go. And I was like, hey, welcome back, dude. And I was like, less than a mile, let's sprint this thing. And I was amped because I'd never obviously been in a race, but you hear about sprint finishes and how this happens, which I always find surprising, how you can go 50 miles or 100 miles or 150 miles or whatever it is. And somehow it comes down to a sprint finish at the end. And I was excited for that. I was like, yes, a sprint finish. In my excitement for this sprint finish with less than a mile to go, I missed a turn. So Josh made this left turn. I missed the turn. I came to a skidding stop. I turned around. I just did not have enough time to catch him with less than a mile to go. And so he rolled into the finish line. I was maybe 30 seconds behind him and ended up finishing 4th overall for the men and second overall for my age group. Josh was in my age group and so was Vincente. So if I would have been able to leg out Josh for the win, I would have actually won my age group and I would have been 3rd overall for the males, which means I would have gotten 2 podiums, the overall and the age group. But finishing 4th, I didn't obviously get the overall podium. I got the age group podium, finishing 2nd. And ultimately, that was the one thing that went wrong in the whole race, was that I made a no turn. I should have turned. I didn't make a turn with less than a mile to go. But other than that, everything went absolutely perfect. To put a bow on this thing, my goal going into the race was to beat 3 hours and 30 minutes. That was mostly a conservative goal because I didn't know what the terrain was going to be like. I didn't think I was going to beat, or even I didn't know how that 3:30 goal was going to go once we hit those Dino tracks, because it was so slow for 3 to 5 miles with the Dino tracks. I I looked at my GPS at some points and I was going 6, 7, 8 miles an hour because it was just so bumpy and aggressive. And I lost so much time there compared to like what my goal was. But then I was able to make up a bunch of time through the drafting and through working with people and stuff like that. And I knew that I was going to beat 3:30 very quickly. And then my second goal was 3:10. And 3:10 was my goal because that would have put me at about 15 or just over 15 miles per hour. And I felt like 15 miles per hour based on my training was a reasonable number to shoot for 50 miles. I'd never done 50 miles before. It seemed reasonable. I ended up coming in and finishing in 2 hours and 56 minutes. So it was a huge victory, way faster than I could have ever hoped for. And my average speed was 16.7 miles per hour, which far exceeded my expectations. And overall, just such a cool, positive experience.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed just like sitting here and listening to this. Like, I love a good story, right? And it was just like you telling like a recap story. And I did enjoy that. Now, a question for you is, with this missed turn, how did that come about? Was it just like maybe not labeled as well? Were you just kind of off in Bryan land, not paying attention and blew right past it? How did that happen?
Yeah. So what's funny is a good question. Andy and I had pre-ridden that part of the course the day before. So like I should have known that that was the turn I needed to make. And then it was one more turn and then you're there. My headphones were telling me my GPS. So it would have audio in my headset as I was going and it'd be like, left turn in quarter mile, and then it would go beep, 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 left turn. I had taken my headphones out with like 2 or 3 miles to go because I was talking to Josh and we had dropped him in Sente. And I just wanted to make sure that I was in it more. I didn't want to be distracted by the headphones. We were on some pretty busy roads. I wanted to make sure I could hear cars and whatever. I still had the GPS on my phone in front of me, so I could look down and see what I'm supposed to do, but it wasn't in my ear. And so once Josh caught me after he missed his turn, and then he caught me again, and I was like, welcome back, bro. I was like, let's do this, sprint to the finish. And for whatever reason in my brain in that moment, I thought that we were on the final straightaway to the finish. And so I didn't even look at my computer. I was like, I pre-rode this. I know where we are. And so I just started sprinting. And then I look behind me and I see Josh turned left. And I was like, I looked down at my GPS and it was like blinking at me, telling me I made the wrong turn. But at that point, it was just, it's too hard. I couldn't catch him.
Yeah, that's super frustrating, man. So now, how do you feel kind of like on the back end being so close to like an age group victory, a podium? Is it like, are you kind of itching for the next one? How do you feel about your experience in general? Is this like, is Bryan going to get into like gravel racing in his 40s? Is it like, it's very, very common for like men in their 40s to get into these like new hobbies and those sorts of things. Like, do you see this as a potential for you?
Yeah, maybe. Gravel racing in general is much more long endurance. And so 50 is considered a very short distance when it comes to gravel racing. The standard gravel races are all between 100 and 160 miles. And then there's some outliers on the other side with, 200 and 300 milers. And then obviously there's some shorter races as well. But I'd say the majority of them are between 100 and 160. I don't think I'm in the game for 6 to 10 hour endurance races. Yeah. I don't think that's in my genetic coding. I don't think it's in my mental makeup. And so what I think I want to do is continue to work in a similar time domain to this one, which is, call it the 3 to 4 hour time domain. But I want to make the races harder. So like this time I did the most vertical climbing I've ever done. It was about 2,300 feet over the course of 50 miles. That's actually not considered very much vert. So a race that has considered a lot of vert is generally going to be 100 feet of climbing for every mile. So that would be that if you did 50 miles, it would be 5,000 feet of climbing. That's considered, a pretty decent amount of vert. And so I think that's what I want to do next is I want to get better at climbing because I'm not very good at it. And it's a challenge for me that I can pursue an attack. And in Boulder here, I mean, geez, I just need to go 4 miles west and I have an entire mountain range that I can practice climbing on. And so I think my next target is going to be in the summer of 2024. I want to find a race that's somewhere between 50 to 70 miles and has 5,000 to 6,000 feet of climbing. So basically doubling the amount of climbing that I did, but keeping the distance similar. And so as I get better at climbing, that hopefully can preserve the total time domain a little bit better. But yeah, I don't see myself as an endurance racer in those like super long 6 to 10 hour time frames. I don't really want to train for it. I don't have the time to train for it. And so I think, staying in that 3 to 4 hour range is probably going to be more my target.
Yeah, I had not realized that when I made that comment. That's a whole new demon, the 6 to 10 hours sort of thing, a whole new kind of breed of human per se.
Yeah. And then the other thing that kind of is related to this, and I talked about this in the Instagram post that I just put up at the end, but this idea of doing something you suck at, the idea of getting newbie gains, there's just so much self-efficacy and self-validation that comes from getting better at something. And it's not that I'm not getting better at weightlifting. Like my technique is always improving. I'm still, able to add a rep or 2.5 pounds here and there over time. Whether this is manifesting a change in my physique or not is probably too ambiguous to tell. But the notion of selecting something that you want to pursue that you're not good at, you literally will see progress in the beginning, session to session. And then it's week to week. And then it's month to month. And you just don't get in weightlifting after 25 years. And it doesn't even have to be a sport. That's the crazy thing to me is like, as I went through this and had this introspection about this experience overall, it's not that I have to choose a sport that I suck at and pursue that. It could be saxophone or guitar or meditation, or there's a number of different pursuits in life that one could do that might interest them, where they start at a low level and they build this self-efficacy, this daily positive reinforcement that you get only by these improvements that you're able to elicit in yourself quickly over time. And I just think there's so much tremendous value in that. And as I look around at my peer group, I just don't see a lot of people doing things that they suck at. Like, especially as we get older, people tend to become more closed-minded and veer toward things that they're good at because they're comfortable with it. And it becomes more challenging for them to, like, it's harder for us to learn things as we get older, right? Like when you learn a new language, you can learn it like that if you're 3 or 4 or 6 or 10 or whatever. But learning a new language at 40, that would be a really good one to pursue too, because I wouldn't do that. That sounds frustrating to me, but like there's so many of these different things that you could pursue that are going to give you that positive feedback daily. And I just really think there's such value in that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because today, actually, after training, I went up and did some posing with Jackson, and it was like my first time. And obviously I sucked at it, and it really, really pissed me off. Like, even though it was unreasonable for me to be mad because I lied. I technically had done it once before, like 8 months ago or 9 months ago or something like that. But it still like really, really pissed me off. And so much to the point where I was like, you know what? I don't know if I want to do this, cause like I'm really bad at it. And what it really was for me, it was like this, like I got 20 years of lifted weights and this is what it culminates as, like this is what I look like. And it really fucking pissed me off. But I think, with you bringing that up, it was kind of just a reminder, like you're at the bottom and it can get better so quickly. And kind of, not to change the topic of the situation, but like never in my life probably have I put in this much effort, this much work, have done this much dedication to every other aspect around like training, eating, and that sort of thing. Like if there would be a time to enter a bodybuilding competition, like that horizon is approaching. So I might as well at least get prepared from the extra skill sets that are needed if I do end up deciding that I want to do one.
Yeah, dude, 100%. Posing 100% fits into that box that I was referencing as well, where it's very related to something you already do. Similar to how biking is kind of related to what I already do because it's in the realm of fitness or whatever.
Yeah.
But posing obviously is even more applicable to what you're doing. It's sort of a requirement for you to publicly stage yourself, right?
Yeah.
But that's something that for sure, like you sucked at it and you will, like through daily posing practice, you would get better at it so quickly. And Jeff Alberts has talked about this before a lot, how literally you have to practice posing every day. Him and Nunez have talked about this. And if you're interested at all for any reason, Jeff Alberts actually has a course that you can buy on 3DMJ website. It's an entire posing course that takes you through everything you need to know. I believe it's written and video. But I've talked to other people that have said it's very thorough, comprehensive, and very helpful. And he's like the godfather of things. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to learn posing, I think he's the guy I'd want to learn it from. So yeah, I mean, if that's something, dude, if you were to do a show, I know that was something that you never really were super gung ho about. Like you always kind of were like, maybe in the future at some point I'll do it, but like you certainly have the physique and the muscle mass for it. And if you're going to do it, like, man, your mid to late 30s sounds like a really good time for you to be really close to your genetic potential, but also not at the point where you're starting to slide backwards at all either. So
yeah. And I haven't, is every single time I'm like, I'm gonna share more. I'm gonna be more public about it. And then every time I just like, I don't know why, but like I've never looked like this in the 201, 202 range. And I'm flat, with things going down. So it's definitely, I've been saying, it's like too early to tell sort of thing, just to kind of, say that. But like, I definitely have the best physique I've ever had, at this body weight. And then as we continue to lean out sort of thing. So I do think it is just getting, I won't even say getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I won't, but just being uncomfortable and that being okay and doing it anyway sort of thing.
Yep, for sure. Well, I know I wasn't super comfortable biking in the beginning either. It was like, I had to really kind of invest into it. And then over the course of time, it became more comfortable, almost like second nature in a way. So I guess what was I going to say? There was one more thing, I guess, to add to the end of my bike story. And it was just that post race, which was really cool for me, was a number of the racers that I passed and dropped over the course of the race came up to me and, gave me props and were like it was really like a backhanded compliments, because they were giving me shit about the fact that I was wearing flats. I wasn't in clip-ins, but they gave me shit about having reflectors on my bike. So I didn't know that having reflectors on your bike was a super rookie move until like 3 people pointed it out to me. And then I looked around at all the other bikes and nobody had reflectors on. So I was wearing flats. I was fucking jacked, dude. Like I was wearing this super tight, white biking shirt. And every time that I'd pass people, I figured they were like commenting on it or whatever, but to have them come up to me at the end and be like, "You're the jack guy in flats with reflectors on your bike and you fucking dropped me. Like, how did you do that?" So to me, that felt really good. And it reminds me, a number of people commented on my post about this too, but equipment matters, but the engine of the rider matters more. And to be somebody that was so bad at cardio for so many years, to be the thing that held me back in basketball in high school. Like my defense was always awful because I sucked at cardio. I always felt like I was saving myself for offense. Then again, in the CrossFit years, it was always 8 to 20 minute workouts that played me and kept me out of qualifying for the regionals as an individual. It's just so cool to come on the back end of that and actually have committed the time, put in the energy and the focus, and to come out of it and actually have performed well, exceeded my expectation, and dropped all these fools that actually like have been biking for years or decades or whatever. It was just so cool, and it makes me so happy on so many levels. So I'm elated at the whole experience. Going forward, I'm looking forward to working with Mike, Dr. Mike, and have him program my cardio for me. In the email that I wrote him yesterday, I proposed that we target 5 to 6 cardio sessions over my 10-day microcycle. So the way my push-pull leg split is it's 6 sessions over 10 days. I figured that 5 to 6 cardio sessions over those 10 days would be perfect. That would average about 4 cardio sessions a week, which is kind of similar to what you're doing. Although I think mine may have a little more intensity in them. I don't know exactly how he's going to go about approaching that. But I also think the cool thing about the push-pull leg split is that it is quite conducive to adding cardio because you can throw harder cardio sessions on the push and the pull days. And then the way I have it set up is a rest day before and after leg day. So if I were to do 2 cardio sessions hard on my upper body days, and then I take 3 days with either lower intensity cardio or no cardio, then that preserves my legs as being fresh for each leg session as well. And so we'll see how Mike responds back with all of that. But I think that that would be a pretty cool approach going forward. I think that that would sustain or even improve my fitness over the off season. And even if I'm not on the bike, getting that very specific neuromuscular motor recruitment where I'm, training the legs to move in this cyclical pattern, the cardiovascular base would still be there. And so I think when I switch back to the bike in the warmer weather again, it would obviously have some curve, like learning curve for maybe 2 to 4 weeks before I might get my legs under me, but the base will be there. And I think that that's really the most important part. And so in conclusion, I very much see myself continuing to do cardiovascular work. I don't think I'll ever go back to a place where I'm lifting and doing steps only. I think I'll always now have some form of cardio work into my program for the duration of the time that I'm physically capable of doing so. And just what a cool year. What a cool year of beginning to bike for health and then progressing it into a competitive outlet for me. And then to wrap it up by just having all this tremendous success has been really, really cool.
Yeah, I will echo your kind of sentiments there of my, and I was, very, very guilty being, not holding any kind of comments there that I was a very hard, like anti-cardio, just do steps sort of person. And I will say I'm very much so enjoying my current capacity, which is, quite the opposite. The non-training days, and I pretty much, I get up, I have some coffee, and then I go do some cardio in the morning. There's some sessions that are harder than others, but it's kind of nice. I've recently gotten more into like YouTube as opposed to like listening to podcasts and stuff. And there's some like channels that I've been enjoying more. And it's like a video might be like 15, 18 minutes, or might have like a 35-minute one. So I'm watching like 1 or 2 and I'm in there. I enjoy that feeling of getting my heart rate elevated, getting sweaty in the morning. Like I get some sun and I'm back home by like 10:30, maybe 11 at the latest. And it's like, now the only thing I need to do is like eat food and work until I go to bed, and my mood's already in a good spot and stuff. And I prefer it, and I will, I'm here saying that I was wrong pretty much.
Me too.
I eat my words a lot, and I'm honest about that, but I do kind of foresee the pendulum swinging back, more away from the just go out and net 20,000 steps per day and into having a little bit more structured cardio and those sorts of things again.
Yeah, very cool, man. I'm really glad that we had a number of people comment on my post and talk about how it's really cool to see me change my perspective on this. And you do see a lot of influencers in the industry that get so tied to the dogma of what they do and what they promote, whether it's Brett Contreras with all the glute stuff and the hip thrust, which is its own thing. But, you see that all the time with people where they get very stuck in their ways, or they have a program and we also see it with Dr. Mike Israetel and his full range of motion stuff. I mean, I don't know how privy you are to the stuff that was happening between Milo and Jared, but like Jared and Milo,
I've had to kind of like turn it off because honestly, if I'm being honest, right, which I do, it makes me think less of both of them, right?
Yeah.
Because of how they're acting about it. And I'm just like, okay, I watched the first couple, like I'm over it. People are getting a little bit childish, and I mean,
I agree with you, but it's more just a broader point of people have a hesitance to want to change their stance on things, even if the evidence is beginning to support that. Like people just get stuck in their biases. Mm-hmm. And so I think being able to say, hey, this was what I believed, but now the evidence shows this. And my personal anecdote or my personal experience also seems to now align with the evidence. And I am going to change my perspective on this. It's something that people respect. And so I think a lot of times people don't change because they think that people are going to be like, oh, well, you've been promoting this thing for 10 years and now you're just going to change your mind on it. And it's like people feel let down. But I think the better perspective on that is, wow, this person is mature enough to be able to see that there is value in this thing that they didn't think there was value in. And now they're willing to kind of change their recommendations based off of that. And so I think you and I have both done that with ourselves, with our clients. And I think there's a level of respect that comes with that too.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're going to get to the rest day discussion. So why don't we push that to next week? And then I also want to add in a subtopic about how many movements or how important it is for all movements in a program to repeat. Meaning like you have parts A through F of your program and every week you do the exact same A through F movements versus either no repeating movements or maybe having a couple repeating movements that you use to diagnose progress. And so I think that'd be a cool discussion. We can kind of make a hybrid episode of that with the rest day discussion for next week.
Perfect. We'll slot that up and talk about it next week. So as always, guys, thank you for listening. Always a very, very fun project with myself and Bryan. And I'm just happy that we get a good amount of people that tune into it each week and allow us to share our insights and everything that we've learned over our careers and prospective years, I should say, doing this. So as always, thank you. We will talk to you next week.